Hello, everyone, and welcome to my introduction to this week's podcast. What an extraordinary hour I have just had talking with Jay Carson. He is a Hollywood scriptwriter, a screenwriter. He had an 18-year career working at the highest levels of American politics. He was a communications director for Howard Dean. He worked with Chuck Schumer. He's been involved in a whole range of political projects at the highest levels, the chief of staff level speech writing, worked with presidents in the United States. Also has a Hollywood connection, has been involved in a whole series of important Hollywood things like The Front Runner and The House of Cards, and more recently The Morning Show, which he left. But he really wanted to talk about the Boulder Outdoor Survival School, BOSS, not Boulder, Colorado, but Boulder, Utah. It's sort of like Knowles, the National Outdoor Leadership School. The first thing he said when I asked him where, before the interview, I said, where are you today? And he said, well, I'm in Topanga Canyon. He said, our house burned down in January. And you think, okay, that's the open? He's calmly saying, our house burned down. Then I found out he was in Australia at the time doing on a scouting trip for Hollywood. His wife and their 4 children were in Topanga Canyon, which is just north of Los Angeles. Everything was lost. They didn't even get to pull a photograph or an album out. And so everything was lost. So imagine that, and he calmly tells me this, and then we talk about what he's learned from these outdoor leadership schools, BOSS, Boulder Outdoor Survival School. And it turns out we have a great deal in common. I've never taken a course like this. I should have, and I should. The self-reliance, the sense that there's not much to whine about. You just have to face getting the next meal, learning how to build a fire, rubbing sticks. And he turned out to be just an extraordinary human being. And, the question I kept asking him was, okay, this works for the people that go through the program. 95 or more percent succeed, and it changes their lives, sometimes forever. It teaches them some survival skills. It teaches them self-reliance. It teaches them not to panic when you're off the grid or when the power goes down or when the grocery stores empty out. But I said, how's this scalable? How do we save America? Because that's not who we are. We live at the other end of the spectrum in obesity and type 2 diabetes and industrial intrusive medicine after we screw up our body balances and so on. People want government to take care of everything and then complain bitterly about government. How does the success that he's talking about scale to a nation of 340 million people? Can we turn this situation around? And the answer appears to be those who have the will to do it are going to be just fine. We'll probably all muddle through, but we're not going to recover as a nation until each of us undertakes a self-help, self-actualization, self-realization activity of some sort. It doesn't mean you have to go out and sleep under the sky with nothing but ferns for a blanket. But it does probably mean that we have to learn to find some new mechanisms and rituals of self-reliance. Or are we content being this America? I know I certainly am not, and that's why I'm out here driving around the country trying to figure out what it is about America. And I'm hoping that the world I see not only cheers me up, but inspires me and makes me feel that we're going to be okay. But through the whole conversation with Jay Carson here, I found myself looking in the mirror, asking myself some pretty hard questions. Anyway, I think you're going to like this. I hope you do. Let me know. It's fascinating. So join our friends group at various levels, and remember the book club. I also want to urge all of you to sign up for the John Steinbeck retreat that's in Monterey from the 21st to the 29th of September. These are fabulous cultural tours just off the coast in Salinas and in Monterey. Great restaurants, Point Lobos, Fremont Peak. This will be the 4th time I've done this, and every time this retreat is one of my very favorite activities. So sign up The book club will be starting soon. The Friends group will have Zoom meetings where we can just have casual conversations. So let's go to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Listening to America. I'm Clay Jenkins, and across from me virtually in Topanga Canyon, California, is Jay Carson, who is the executive director of the Boulder Outdoor Survival School, among other things, has written for Hollywood, some very important projects, and had a political consulting life early on. Tom Daschle and Chuck Schumer and a whole range of other people. Howard Dean, you were the communications director for Howard Dean. We all remember that moment in American history. So welcome, Jay.
Thank you so much, Clay. It's great to be here.
So let's start because most of our listeners will want to know more about your basic biography. Just give us a quick romp of how you got to this point.
I'll do my best. I was born in Macon, Georgia, and went to public school throughout, and then thought I should go experience something different. So I went about as different as you possibly could. I went to Columbia University in New York City at 18, and I learned what culture shock was by experiencing it. I had no concept of that term. I'd heard it, but I had no concept, and I really experienced it. From Macon, Georgia to Columbia it was a big change in my life. I got into politics while I was still in college. I worked on Chuck Schumer's first Senate race in 1998, and I started on that race as a sophomore in college, I think, and the race finished when I was a junior. And that kind of launched a political career that I was sort of an unwitting participant in for a while. I just would do a job and then get offered another job and do that. And so I worked in politics for quite a long time, 15 or 18 years. Moved to Los Angeles after we lost a presidential campaign in 2008, and became a writer while I was here. I've always loved writing. On the days I wrote on a campaign was the sanest I ever felt. And so I thought, well, maybe I should just do the sane part of the job. I joined, probably one of the other darkest uh, fields in the world, which is Hollywood. And I've been doing that for about 15 years. In 2021, I went as a student on a Boulder Outdoor Survival School course, and I just loved it. It changed my perspective, changed my perspective on life in general and on my life in particular. Fast forward to I'm the executive director of that school now, but I'm also still a writer. So I still write, and I run we call it BOSS. So I still run BOSS, the Boulder Outdoor Survival School. So that's my quick trip through my life.
So
somewhere along the line, I have 4 kids and a wife, but I'll
just a couple of quick follow-up before we get to the Boulder Outdoor Survival School. Tom Daschle, Howard Dean, Bill Bradley, Chuck Schumer. You worked for the William J. Clinton Foundation. You could be the chief of staff of a very mighty senator if you wanted, or a governor. I mean, that career could have taken you all the way through until retirement and beyond. Why did you choose to turn away from that?
One, I felt I didn't have a choice but to turn away from it. It was killing me. And I don't know that I'm preternaturally suited for that kind of day-to-day warfare, the hand-to-hand combat that's just an inevitable part of politics today. And I left when I thought it was bad when I left. And it was, I got out of national politics in, 2008, 2009. Things have not improved since then in terms of the tone and tenor of it. But I think I had probably forced myself to do that job, to be good at it. And I'm much more naturally a writer and an artist. I do much better when I get to sit and write all day rather than argue with people and try to convince people of my correctness in a position. So yeah, it just didn't suit me. That said, I have missed it in the last few years, feeling like I have an impact, and we can get to that later if you want to, but I had to get out of it when I got out of it, but I've missed the seriousness of purpose that exists in public service. I had to leave it, and I found myself so much happier day to day once I became a writer. I would look out and say, well, what's changed because I gave 15, 16 hours at the office today? I don't know. even when I would win an election, not I, but even when we would win an election, I would look around and say, I'm not sure much has changed. I would look back 4 years later and go, maybe, but is it worth, is it worth all of my, um, everything I have inside me for this? And I decided when I left politics to try to make more of an impact within an arm's length of me. So people that I came in contact with, my family, my children's school, my neighborhood, my community, places where I could actually see that if I put in 14 hours, there was, 14 hours of results instead of just feeling like I was throwing, I often felt I was throwing like pebbles into the ocean when I was working in national politics.
Yeah, and there's no 8 to 5. I mean, whenever you get involved at that level in national politics, you're basically sleeping only enough to get back into your shoes and into your jacket because it
Yes.
becomes all consuming in a personal life. Either takes an absolute saint as a spouse or it just doesn't work at all.
Yeah. I also looked around, and this is a good trick that I recommend to my kids and to people who seek career advice. I looked around at the people at the very highest level of the business I was in. And I said, this is a little immodest, but I was like, okay, I can have any of those jobs. Just as you said, one day I can have any of those jobs. Which one do I want? I was like, I don't want his job. I'm killing myself working my butt off on an upward trajectory in a business where I don't actually want to end up where the people who were on the upward trajectory ahead of me, I was like, I got to get out of here. And I stumbled across this Joseph Campbell quote somewhere along the line, which is, one can spend one's whole life climbing the ladder only to realize in the end it had been placed against the wrong wall.
Wow, that's
I
excellent.
think when I read it, I cried. I mean, that's my memory of it. I was like, oh my God, I've been climbing the ladder placed against the wrong wall. And I said, I'm 30 something. I can get off that ladder and instead of continue to climb it until 65 and realize that I was miserable. So
I don't want to waste much more time. Well, not waste, but I don't want to spend much more time on that part of your career. Were you there for the Howard Dean moment, the whoop-ah?
I was actually not in the room. I had flown ahead to New Hampshire. We had a feeling that we were not going to win Iowa. And so I had flown ahead to New Hampshire that morning to try to stabilize us on the ground in New Hampshire because we knew we needed to win there. If we were going to lose Iowa, we needed to win in New Hampshire to stay alive. And most people forget that before the scream, I love Governor Dean. He's a wonderful human being.
It's a tragedy that he did not become the president of the United States. I watch him on some of the talk shows. He's always thoughtful. He's
Yeah,
partisan without being horrible. He knows what he's talking about. This is a master who just had a really bad moment.
he did. We had also just lost Iowa by 19 points. And so I think more than the scream, that kind of big double digit loss. I've done a lot of presidential campaigns now. It's hard to come back from that. And so the scream might have been a nail in the coffin, but losing Iowa by almost 20 points was the bigger problem. On that day, the bigger problem was having lost Iowa by that much.
So you're involved in this career for what, 15 to 18 years. You could have taken it right up to the top. You could be the chief of staff to the president of the United States for all we know, or certainly to a Senate majority leader or whatever. You have a great skill set, and being a good writer certainly helps. You decided not to continue down that path. All we can say is it's gotten much, much worse since. Imagine what it would be like today to be handling one of these political superstars. So you gravitated almost to the other end of the spectrum as well as the other end of the country, both to a career in Hollywood. I'm talking to Jay Carson, who's had a distinguished career both in Hollywood and in Washington. But really, what I want to talk about is the Boulder Outdoor Survival School. How does one get from Chuck Schumer to boss?
It's almost like the antidote I needed to my time in politics and in Hollywood. They are both difficult businesses, and if you're not too careful, you'll turn, you wonder what that pain is in your back, and you look around and you've got a knife in you in both businesses. And I sold a big TV show at some point. Someone said to me, "This must be this must be a bigger deal than winning an election." I can't, a Senate race or a White House. I can't remember what it was, but this must be a bigger deal than winning on election day. And, think of how much more something you'll have. And I was like, what? And they said, oh yeah, this has got to be a bigger deal for you than that. I said, no way. Like, but this was at the time, it was and maybe still is the biggest sale of a TV show in the history of television. So the most money ever paid for a television show. And someone said, think of that. And I said, that amount of money is like one plane sitting on one aircraft carrier that the commander in chief is in charge of. This is not even, we're not even in the same ballpark in terms of stakes or importance. I'm not saying that
Stakes are,
Hollywood does.
stakes are not high in Hollywood. I mean, if a $200 million project collapses, there's a lot of ripple effect, but someone in Iowa is not made better by it. Their working conditions are not better. Their Social Security is not secure. We're talking about apples and something very different.
It has given it that has helped me keep a healthy perspective in Hollywood, just knowing that I see a lot of people in Hollywood who don't know that there's anything more important than this. While I love being a writer, I kind of had a nagging sense that there was more for me in the world, in my life, really, not necessarily in the world. And so in the doldrums of the pandemic, I have been taking my kids camping a lot since they were born. My oldest is 12 and a half. And what I found was that the deeper we went into nature, the less I realized I knew. And I grew up in Georgia. I grew up spending time backpacking and spending time outdoors, but I was the sole source of safety and comfort for these kids. And we would go deep into the woods. I was like, I have no idea how to do anything if this stops working.
And you're holding up a phone at the moment. So if your smartphone goes blank, and it usually does out in the middle of nowhere, then what?
Yes. I had no idea what to do, basically no idea. And I said, that's not okay. I want to feel more comfort out here. And I actually want to so it was the sense of well-being. And then there was the actual well-being. I want to have more skills in the wilderness. And I also want to feel more confident in the wilderness if I'm going to keep doing this with my children.
Yeah, let's stop there for just a minute. We need to take a break. I'm talking with Jay Carson. Fortune magazine listed you as one of 40 under 40. It's a huge resume and so varied. When we come back, I want to ask you precisely what the Boulder Outdoor Survival School really amounts to. So stay tuned, everyone. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. I'm talking to Jay Carson, who's in Topanga Canyon today. At the end of the first segment, you talked about how a friend of yours raved about the Boulder Outdoor Survival School, and you, as a father of 4, wanted a greater skill set when you take your children deep into the woods. So pick it up from there.
This friend had just never stopped talking about his experience. He had taken 2 courses, a 14-day course and a course called the Hunter-Gatherer course, which is a more intense version. I learned later a more intense version of the courses. And I said, what's so great about it? He said, well, you learn all these skills, but I really think of it as appreciation camp. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But I went and I did it. And so I signed up for a 14-day course in the fall of 2021. Essentially how a course works is you're in the absolute, just stunning environs of southern Utah. And, where you can walk from what feels like Mexico to what feels like northern Canada in a day. When you're at high elevation, you're in these evergreen forests, and then you drop to lower elevation and you're in those gorgeous red and orange and pink canyons. And you learn to survive out there with not much more than a water bottle and a knife. And so there's no tent, no sleeping bag, no backpack, no flashlight, no matches, none of the stuff that I had come to rely on. And so on that course, I learned all the skills that I thought that I wanted to learn, right? I learned how to feel more confident out there. I learned how to make shelter, how to find water, how to build fire, how to build friction fire, the proverbial fire with 2
Wait a minute,
sticks.
you actually could twirl sticks and make a fire?
I reliably.
How long does I've seen Castaway, Tom Hanks, bloody hands, work on it, frustrated, just want to die, kick everything, give up. I'm never going to get a fire. And then suddenly it happens. How long did it take you to build a fire?
It took me several days to get the skill down. Well, first of all, you have to build the fire kit, right? So you take raw wood, you chop down a sagebrush that's this big, and you you take your knife and you have no tools, no power tools. So you take your knife and you mold it into a hearth board, and then you make a spindle, and then you find a top rock and a bow and all this sort of stuff. And it's just every part of it is just stuff you find in the wilderness. I'm glad you brought up Castaway, because the idea for Fire on that movie came from instructors at the Boulder Outdoor Survival School.
Really? So they were advisors to that film, and they helped him do this.
Two instructors lived on set for the entirety of the island filming, and all of the idea for Wilson, the thing to talk to, that came, the volleyball, that came from the Boulder Outdoor Survival School instructors who were living
That
there,
did
because they
too.
said, yeah, they told the director and writer, they said, the first thing you would need is something to talk to, because what we teach at Boulder at Boss is the priorities of survival, and actually your mental health is the number one priority, because that involves calming yourself down if you're in a long-term survival situation like that. They were just joking. They said he'd need something to talk to, and they're like, what? Well, maybe that volleyball. And so he started talking to that. But yes, just like Tom Hanks, I learned to build a friction fire.
All right, you're
I was
40 and you weren't in Cub Scouts or Eagle Scouts. You don't know,
I,
you've never done any of this.
I was a failed Boy Scout. I think I made it one rank up. I think I probably had two merit badges, and I made it one rank up the thing. I was nowhere near. Again, I spent a lot of time doing what a lot of people do. I did some backpacking, I did some camping. I loved to be outdoors, but I had no skills. And then I developed this greater confidence in nature, and so I feel very comfortable taking my kids into deep nature. But there is this other ancillary benefit that I was not counting on, which is my shift in perspective. I thought I was going to go learn wilderness skills, come back and feel more confident taking my kids out. What happened, when you have food, water, and shelter stripped away, the priorities of my life organize themselves correctly. So instead of me being worried about that conference call and the Zoom and the person that disrespected me over email and this person getting back to me and da da da, all of that stuff goes away when water, food, and shelter are missing. And it was like I put on a different pair of glasses and saw the world in a different way as a result of having done the course. There's an abiding sense of peace and calm that I've kept with me from that student course. I've since, I go out on courses now, because I work at the school, but even that student course just helped rewire the way that I see things in a way that I was not counting on. And a lot of people, there's a lot of talk from everyone of like, what's happening? And we started out this way, is the republic ending? Are things falling apart? What will I do? While I don't want the republic to end, and I don't want, and I hope everything will always be fine, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what will happen if the power grid goes down, or the this or the that, because I'm like, oh, I know exactly what to do. And so the worry space that so many people spend, like, I'm just going to use it, let's say with 20 parts in our brain, I feel like a lot of people are using 10 parts of their brain in the worry space, and the other 10 to do whatever they need to do. The 10 parts of my brain for the worry space have been reduced to one or two as a result of having done the Boulder Outdoor, a Boss course. And I'm just a lot happier and calmer as a result. And that I was not counting on. I thought I'm going to learn fire, shelter, water, food, and I'm going to be good with taking my kids out. And I have a completely different outlook on life. So,
When you're in the depths of politics at the level you were at, I mean, you live on edge. There's an aggressiveness. There's toxic masculinity just floating around that world, drowning everyone it touches. To go from that world where it's a ruthless world into the new you, who's on the other side of this experience, is a pretty huge shift. Let's talk just quickly about the mechanics of it. So you sign up for this thing, then what happens?
you sign up, and then you get a good bit of instruction on what you need to do before a course. We have courses running. I signed up with a year in advance because I wanted a lot of time to prepare. I said I was 40 for it. I was actually 42 for my student course. And people do the course in their 60s. We've had someone complete a 14-day course that was 76 years old. Succeeding at the course is much more mental than it is anything else. In fact, among the instructors, we have a little saying, which is, be wary of the person. We do a run at the beginning of the course just to see how people's physical fitness is. It's not a pass fail run or anything like that. It's just really to see who's fitter and to test people's heart rates, so that if when we're in if we're in the field and we see someone's heart rate's elevated, we can compare it to a baseline. And we say, be wary of the person who finishes the run first, because oftentimes that person doesn't do so well on the course because the mental fitness is not as strong as their physical fitness. So I signed up a year in advance because I wanted to be really fit for it. I wanted to be ready for it and prepared. I did a lot of training for it, but we have people signing up for courses right now in April that are going to go out in June, and that's perfectly acceptable. Plenty of people do that, and they do just fine. Um, and then this very minimal gear that you need to get. That's the good part. You
You
need
have
to
to
get
get to Utah.
to get to Boulder, Utah. I flew into Salt Lake City, took a shuttle down to Boulder, Utah. Was just stunned by how beautiful it
A
was. I had
long,
not.
long shuttle. Boulder is one of the most beautiful places in the world,
It
and
sure is.
and in every direction, within 2 hours, there are 1,000 hikes through canyons
Yes.
and up on cedar ridges and alpine situations. I just came into Boulder the other day and crossing, I think, Boulder Mountain, and you're up on top of it, and you think you're at 13,000 feet in California. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
You think you're at 13,000 feet in Colorado. It's this
Exactly.
marvelous alpine zone with it, and the aspen trees, even in the winter, were just stunning. So if people don't know, Boulder in southeastern Utah is one of the world's great places. Easy access to the Grand Canyon, to Lake Powell, et cetera, et cetera. Not so far from Moab. And what, 5 national parks in Utah, and you're within shouting distance of most of them. So you get there. Once you paid your fee and you turn up, there's an orientation and so on. Are you alone out there in the field, or are you with others?
So I was in a group of 12. 12 is our maximum number of students. And you have 2 instructors and an apprentice. So you have 3 people in charge of you. What I didn't realize was that I took a 2-week course, and over the first week, they were teaching me the skills so that I could survive on my own. And it reminded me of accelerated parenting in the best way. I started out absolutely moronic about what to do out there. In fact, the first night, I don't want to give too much away, but the first night you are allowed to really rely on your own wits. And I've been told I'm a natural leader, and so the group looked to me for what to do. It was the middle of the night. It was kind of chilly. I said, "Okay, everybody, lay down on the sand. That's the perfect place to sleep tonight." It was the worst place to sleep tonight, and we all had a really cold, difficult first night. And then in the morning, they teach you the skills to not ever do that again. And that was really a night. It was very humbling because I realized, boy, I really don't know what I'm doing. Over the course of that week, we learned a lot of skills, so that by the second week of the course, the instructors are increasingly absent by design. And then there's a solo section of the course where you spend 2, 3, 4 nights, sometimes 5. We do a 28-day course, and you'll do 5 or 6 nights solo during that. And you're using all the skills that you've learned. You're using fire, your shelter, all of that sort of stuff, and you really are surviving completely on your own. It's really wonderful and liberating to do. And you think back, you're out there solo, and I think back to the first night where I said, "Yo, let's sleep on the sand." And I'm like, wow, that was like 8 days ago. And I had no idea how to do any of the stuff I'm doing right now. And I'm surviving on my own in the wild. And there's a real sense of awakening in it. Like I really felt like I was coming back into my own in a way that our society has disconnected us from nature in so many ways. And this was a real reconnection to it for me. And I felt like I was really reconnecting to myself by getting deeper into nature. Um, so yes, you're alone for a good chunk of the second half of the course. You really do get a lot of hands-on instruction for the first half of the course. And you're just kind of there's a real narrative to the course. You're essentially um you have something stripped away, not stripped away really, but you're lacking something, and then they teach you how to get it. Right? So you experience water stress in the desert, which is real stress, and then they teach you how to find water in the desert. Boy, I've never paid attention to a lesson more in my life. It's the end of the day. I've drained a little water bottle. I'm in my mouth is dry, and they say, who'd like to learn how to find water? I'm like, me. And then we did, and we found water in the desert. And I was on an ill-advised solo hike. This is after my course on the Backbone Trail, which runs from the Pacific Palisades up into deep into Ventura County. It's a 67-mile trail, and I was doing it by myself. A heat wave came up during my hike, and I ran out of water,
Oh
and it
my.
was pretty scary. And the truth is, I probably should have used my survival school skills to turn around, right? But I was kind of stuck in a spot where I couldn't. And so I just remembered the water lesson. How do I find water here? It was an arid, it looked like there was no water anywhere around. The southeastern version of me, no creeks, no waterfalls. I don't hear anything, but I used the skills. I looked for butterflies, birds. I walked up washes. I looked for certain kinds of vegetation because I know from Boss that they love water. And I found a big, 3 foot deep, 3 foot wide puddle of water, clean, clear, perfect water in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know if it saved my life, but it definitely saved me from what might have been a rescue by the search and rescue people.
So you're out in the middle of nowhere, and you decide to make a bow and arrow.
Mm-hmm.
And all you've got is knives,
Mm-hmm.
and so you have to find wood that won't break when you put some stress on it. You've got to find something that
Yes.
will be the string. You've got to fashion an arrow that's straight enough to shoot reasonably straight. You've got to have some sort of a projectile point on it, or you need to sharpen it like a very like Odysseus putting out the eye
Mm-hmm.
of Polyphemus in the Odyssey. I'm just going to lie down and die at this point. How do
I
you able to
I
do
know
it?
what you mean. I thought this is a Hercule. I'm glad you brought up Odysseus. I was like, this is a Herculean task. I will never get this done, but I'm just going to try because ever since I was a little kid, I've been wanting to know how to make a bow and arrow. And every grown up I would ask, they would hand me a rotting oak stick from the ground and give me a piece of string. And I was like, this is not how it. And so I finally learned how to make a proper one. And it was a piece of Russian olive that I hacked away at until it was planed just right. And we did have string. That was the one thing. We didn't make a sinew string. So we brought string along hidden in a backpack. And we said, anyone that made a bow and arrow, we gave them the string. But aside from that, every part of it was made ourselves. We found the feathers. And I now know the right wood to make arrows out of. Seep willow is great because it grows long and straight. Tamarisk is really great, and I made a bow and arrow that worked really well. And then it was one of the things in the fire. Our home burned in the fire, and I thought of that. I thought of that bow and those arrows and how hard I had worked on it right away. I was like, oh no.
Just to make sure everyone's on the same page, you and your family, you have 4 children, a wife. Your house in Topanga Canyon burned down in the recent fires in Southern California. You lost everything, not even time
Everything.
to get the cliched photographs out of the
No.
house. You lost absolutely everything. We'll come back to that in the third segment of the program. And I'm guessing that Boss helped you get through this thing too, but the skills, the coping mechanisms, the ability to control panic, and so on. But so all right, so it's very moving to me to think that when you lost everything, and I'm trying to imagine what that means: books, photographs, clothing, kitchen
Cars.
utensils, cars, things that have mattered to you, high school trophies, whatever, a photograph of you and Howard Dean, whatever it is, and the thing that you felt this kind of deep nostalgic lament over was this handmade bow and arrow that you made out there in the Boss School. That tells you the depth of what it took to reach that skill set. In other words, if I had
Yes.
handed you a $7,000 bow and said,
Yes.
I want you to have this bow. Or even if I had fashioned one like Odysseus, I had made a magnificent bow myself. I was a bow maker and handed this to you. You would not have lamented either of those as much as the one you built yourself in the woods.
Yes, not even close. In fact, that's a real example. I bought a really nice long bow and a recurve bow for my son. I actually made the bow for my son. I made it big enough that I could hunt with it, but I gave it to him when I got home. He's 12 and a half, and he just adored it. And but the amount of time that I put into it, it made me care about the really expensive one. Get another one, and to call high tech archery, and in El Segundo and buy another one. But the one that I made was the one that I really missed, and that was an interesting part of the fires. It was the irreplaceable things, or the things that my children or I had put a lot of time into making, that I really miss. None of the stuff that expensive things, or that stuff is fine. But
So
yeah,
you're out there now. So is there any time during these 14 days did you think, no, 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 I can't do this. No way,
yes,
no way. I just can't do this.
yes, a number of times actually. It was so beyond my comfort zone, and that there were a lot of times where I thought, "What have I done?" That first night where I didn't know how to do anything, and it was cold, and I was really like, "What have I done? This is really stupid." And and there were several other times. I mean, you do quite a bit of mileage on the expedition courses, and there were several other times hiking and when we were experiencing food stress or water stress, where I would just say, I don't know that I can, I don't know that I can go on. And part of what we teach students is just take another step. That's one of the things that we teach. And then the other is this concept of comparing down. So instead of looking at what I wish I had, I train my brain to look at how much worse this could be. You know, boy, imagine this hike if I didn't have these shoes, and I were walking barefoot over this cactus. Boy, that would be rough. Or imagine how cold this night would be if I didn't have a pine straw bed and a blanket. That is a skill that I've brought into every single hour of my daily life and was very helpful after the fires.
We need to take a short break. I'm talking to Jay Carson. When we come back, I want to talk about Henry David Thoreau. We'll be back, everyone, in just a moment. Welcome back to this special edition of Listening to America. I'm talking with Jay Carson, who's in Topanga Canyon, but spends a lot of time in Boulder, Utah. Not Boulder, Colorado, but Boulder, Utah, which is this kind of funky, small population, extraordinarily interesting population, intentional people, highly regarded restaurant that people come to from all over the country, and then intimate connections to some of the most beautiful hikes and canyons and drives and camping places in the world. Bears Ears is nearby, Grand Staircase, Escalante, the national parks, and so on. So, Jay, we've been talking about this. It seems like such a strange trajectory. So there's the cutthroat, ruthless world of Washington, and then there's the cutthroat, ruthless world of Hollywood, and then suddenly you're out there, eating grubs or digging around a cactus to find water, or looking for water still standing in pools on rocks. It's an amazing trajectory, and now your life is never the same. You're not moving back into that world. You might still have some ties to it, but this is something that's more meaningful to you. So as we're talking about this, I keep thinking of Henry David Thoreau, because everything you say reminds me of what Thoreau is talking about in Walden, that he says what he wanted most of all when he writes his own job description in the first great chapter, Economy. He says, I want to be present. I want to be present. I want to live in the nick of time. I want to notch my stick there. Well, as you know, being present is almost impossible. We go robotically through life. You take a meeting in Hollywood, it's the usual thing. Would you like some sparkling water? And then people come in, and it's egos, and it's, the whole, it's like a cliche of Hollywood, and yet there it is. I mean, how can you not be present on day 4 of the BOSS program? I mean, it seems to me like you have to clear a lot of stuff out of your mind before you can survive out there.
It's interesting. It just works. It works in spite of my belief that it won't. And I show up to courses now knowing I've tested it. I've done 5 courses. I've tested it every single time. It works. And I will show up this season before I go out on my course, and I will say, this big thing that I'm worried about, well, I'm just going to be thinking about this the whole time. And I've showed up there with big worries, Hollywood project falling through, whatever, the same concerns that every father and husband have, financial concerns. And is this kid okay? And what about this? And well, I'll never stop thinking about that on this course. And then within about 2 hours, it's gone. and I kind of laugh at it. I can't believe that I was that concerned about that thing. I can't believe that I couldn't get perspective and realize that that was just my mind racing, trying to tell me that there was something wrong when in fact there wasn't. The interesting part is it's because I'm often presented with something actually being wrong. like, like
Real
instead
thing,
of
a real wrong thing.
correct, like I'm scared of heights. And oftentimes you just described Boulder beautifully. You're hiking along. It looks like we're going to be able to get down off this mesa and end up down in that wash, which will carry us to the place we want to go. Holy crap, there's no way down, and now I'm standing at the edge of this and, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, 200 feet down. I'm terrified of heights. That thing that I was worried about, well, are they going to do the script or not? Is my kid going to enjoy the summer camp or the this or the is just gone. And I'm laser focused on how am I going to get down this cliff? This is real survival here. How am I going to get down? Or that's a storm coming. Wow, that thing's moving really fast. We are up on this big ridge. This is not a place to good that kind of thing, and it brings me right into the present. It's never the worry has never lasted more than 2 hours into a course. And then the rest of the course, there are worries, but they are real present worries. And then my brain, I mean, I'm a screenwriter, not a neuroscientist, but I've read a lot about neuroplasticity, and my brain has begun to rewire itself as a result of these boss courses. It is the anxious pathways have gotten less deep, and the what really matters pathways have gotten a lot deeper because I've faced real hardship. Like, wow, I haven't had food in 4 days. I'm concerned about that, not how am I perceived by this studio head.
So I've done a couple of long solo hikes on the Little Missouri River in North Dakota, one of 6 weeks and one of 17 days. And you're out. I have a pack and I have a sleeping bag and I have freeze dried food and I have a little tiny little stove. At first, it was a Surveyor stove, which were just a nightmare to play with, and now the stoves are incredible, and
Mm-hmm.
super lightweight, and a tent that weighs a pound and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm out there, I'm not exactly Kit Carson. I'm at the top of the apex of an incredible industrial machine that can produce a lightweight this and a freeze dried that, and I never forget that I have these incredible industrial advantages that Lewis and Clark didn't have. They had to actually do it. So, but when I come off of it after 17 days, first of all, I think I could walk to the North Pole. So I'm back in
Mm-hmm.
my body. I'm back in
Mm-hmm.
my body, and for a couple of days, you ache, your digestion is off, you can't sleep. And then suddenly things start to click, and your body, you get into your body again. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
always shocked by that, Jay, because I then realize, oh, I'm essentially a head delivery system in life. I'm not really in my body much of the time. I'm a head delivery
Mm-hmm.
system to this meeting or that project. When you get back in your body, it's a glorious feeling when your legs start to get strong and your back is strong and so on. At the end of the journey, I not only think I could walk to the North Pole, I also lament that I have to go back into the world. And then I
Mm-hmm.
make these heroic things. I'll never have a Big Mac again. I'll never do this. I'll never do that. And then 3 days later, you're ordering a double cheeseburger at In-N-Out Burger. So that it's amazing how quickly the world sucks you back into its paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
How have you handled that?
Well, what a great way to describe it, it being actually back into your body, because that is exactly what I experienced too. I'm going to steal that and use it because it's exactly what happens to me out there. I actually become present in my body, which puts me present in the moment. And I don't want to sound too woo woo about, I'm a public school kid from Macon, Georgia. I'm an Atlanta Braves fan. And you know what I mean? I'm about as, down the middle as you can get. And, but that's what happens to me out there. I get back in my body. I get present. I hear bird songs. I hear the creek. I'm right here. And how do I deal with it when I come back home? It it persists in some way, not as much, right? Like when I'm in traffic on the 101, I am not in the same exalted, peaceful place that I am when I'm out, at deep in the Capitol Reef National Park, or, up on some ledge, or in the hiking, thigh deep through the Escalante River, which I did for like, it felt like days on end last summer. Um, but it stays. And you know, maybe more importantly, my kids and my wife notice that it stays. So I could, BS myself. Oh yeah, no, it stayed for a long. But my kids and my wife know the difference. Like, my wife says to me that that there's a confidence that I have from having done these courses that she can feel. And my kids say that I'm just calmer and more present with them, because since I started doing this, not like I do it and then I'm calm and present for 2 weeks and then I go back to like, and I'm distracted. I'm not, I'm in my phone when I shouldn't be. I'm all that sort of stuff. Um, but they say that it persists. And I think there's another thing that has persisted that's been interesting for me to explore, which is that there's this, at least I got this sense that growing up, that success meant never having to do dirty work yourself again, right? And I think this is a real phenomenon from the late 20th century, right? If you've done well enough, you literally never have to get your hands dirty again. Someone can clean your house, someone can fix your toilet, someone can fix your lawnmower. But fix your lawnmower, you don't even need to have one. You have someone that comes and does that and does this and does that. What I realized was that I was in my 30s and I didn't know how to do anything, not just in the wilderness, but I couldn't fix a dryer or a washer or a lawnmower and I didn't believe that I could or should. And my experience at Boss taught me that I'm capable and I can fix those things, right? I'm not great at knots, but I learned them.
You're absent from your family when this is going on, but it sounds like your 4 children and your wife think that's a trade-off worth having, because he's come back more grounded, more calm. It's obviously fulfilled him in some important ways.
Yes. I mean, all of my kids have been to Boss, some of them a number of times. They really love it there. So they feel a part of the world and of the community there. I don't do our 28-day courses because I think that's too long for me to be away from little kids. At 14 is, I think, and they think the trade-off's worth it. And I think not just for who I come home, how I come home and how I interact with them, but also the opportunities they get as a result of it. I don't spend much time on the overbooked California campsite reservation site. Like, I can just find a site for us to camp out in. And so we have a lot of wild camping experiences that my kids love. They draw a straight line from that to Boss. Daddy didn't know how to do this stuff before. Daddy knows how to do this stuff now. We camp out under the stars. My son, his school is taking a school trip to Joshua Tree tomorrow.
Oh
And
my.
his teacher, who interestingly teaches at a survival school in Washington State, so we have a lot in common, he said, it's great. I've got a bunch of kids in my class who are terrified of the fact that we're going to be outside. Your son, my son's name is Henry, your son is saying, why do we have to sleep in a tent? I just want a cowboy camp. I can't even see the stars when I'm in a tent. He's like, his confidence out there is just, he's in the other direction. He's very comfortable in nature because I'm comfortable in nature.
So some of these students going to Joshua Tree are, just by that fact alone, being outside in the middle of nowhere, terrified.
Terrified. Never slept outside a night in their life.
They don't really
And
necessarily want to either.
they want to be with their friends, but the trade-off for them, it's like the trip, the outdoors is the medicine that they'll take to get to be with their friends. And for my son and the kids that have spent a lot of time outdoors, and there are plenty of kids in the class that have, but for my son and the ones that are comfortable outdoors, that is part of the gift also.
What's your Bible? I mean, there's Walden, which is one of my very favorite books. There's Desert Solitaire, written in your area by the great Edward Abbey, and he gets himself in some life-threatening scrapes. A book I love is Gonzalez' Deep Survival,
I like
Who
that
Lives,
too.
Who Dies, and Why. And I climbed Mount Whitney twice with my friend Russ, and the first time I came late because my flights had been canceled. I hadn't been able to train. I hadn't read any of the guidebooks. I hadn't taken any advice. I wasn't, and I got there, and so I made it. And the only reason I got to the top is shame, because I was not going to let myself not get to the top. But then I read Deep Survival, and I had committed almost every sin
Yes.
that's going to cost you your life. Of course,
Yeah.
you're not going to die on. You're not probably not going to die on Mount Whitney. You can, but I love
Yes, you
that book
can. Yeah.
because he says people people don't know to turn back the 12 miles. They think, oh, I'll find my way out the other end, and that's when they
Yeah.
die. You need to gut it out, retrace your steps those 12 miles to get to wherever you were. Do you have a Bible? Is there a book that speaks to you about this more than others?
Yeah. It's funny. You just named some great ones. Like when Abby jumps over when he jumps into down that pour
You
off,
can't get out.
thinking it'll be 10 feet down the next one, and it's 100 feet down the next one, and it's 20 feet back up the other one. I told my wife that story the other day. We were hiking in the desert and we got to a pour off, and I said, hey, always check. She did a 14-day course last summer, and it probably blew her mind more than it blew mine. She's from Los Angeles. She's a Valley girl from Los Angeles. And it blew her mind. I said, always check a pour off. And I told her the story of Abby going down and thinking he was going to die. She said, what did he do? I said, he cried, he prayed, and he found his way out. Desert solitaire is amazing. Um, I, it might be the comfort crisis actually, because I love that Lawrence Gonzalez book.
It's so good.
It's really terrific, and I naturally have a dark, wry sense of humor, and I didn't realize until I read his book that that is a real key to survival. Like on the hunter gatherer course, we would set 50 traps, and then we'd check them in the morning, and people would come back, and we'd have two mice for breakfast for 13 people. Experiencing real discomfort is the healthiest thing you can do in modern society, because it gets me out of the mindset of I need more and more comfort and more ease. My kids and I were walking onto a plane the other day coming back from New York City 2 days ago, on Sunday. We walked right by this guy in business class who was barking at the flight attendant because he could see a trace of dog hair on the floor in front of his seat, and he needed the whole plane to be re-cleaned right then because he could not possibly sit in the seat. And I leaned down to one of my daughters and I was like, that guy needs to go to a boss course. And they just laughed and they were like, I know, Daddy, why is he? And that's just normal. And I probably had a part of me that was a lot like that before I went to boss.
Before I lose you, let's talk a little bit about the fire. On what day did your house burn down?
The first day, January 7th, within hours of the fire starting, I was on a location scout in Australia, so I wasn't even here. My wife was here. She sent me a photo from our deck, and the smoke looked really close. But honestly, I've probably evacuated 25 times since in the 18 years I've lived in LA. And she said, I think I'm going to evacuate. I said, sure. And that was at like 11:30 in the morning. By 8 o'clock at night, the house is gone, and most of the houses on that street. And really gone. I mean, just burned at an amount of heat that I don't think I could imagine. Because when I've gone up there, it liquefied metal. It just burned everything, and it has been very difficult to deal with. And boss has really helped. That compare down perspective has really helped, instead of, gosh, I used to have this and now I don't. Not doing that is really helpful. And at the same time, losing a home and being displaced is tough. As I said to people, even at boss, when I'm moving every single night, I build myself a really nice shelter, and that's my home for the night. And right now, for 3 months, we've been in different rental homes and different guest houses and there hasn't really, there has, but once we call a place home, there's this sense of, well, we'll be leaving it soon. So that's been tough.
What are you going to do? How are you going to regroup?
We're trying to just stay open to the possibilities, and not move too quickly. I think we're going to buy some land in the desert because it's less likely to burn than here. And we may just end up renting in Topanga until our kids are old enough to be done with school. It's just, it's living near nature. You can't get real fire insurance. And that's just, so you basically, if your house burns down, and clearly it can, you're going to lose 75 cents on the dollar of whatever your house is worth. And that's just, that's not survivable for us. It's survivable. It's not sustainable for us to be able to do that.
Wow, Jay, this has been such an amazing conversation. I wish we had more time. We'll make more
Me
time to
too.
talk again
Yeah,
about these things. I want to come see you in your world of Boulder.
please do.
We'll,
Anytime.
we'll go wandering about and have break bread together and talk further about this extraordinary situation that the country's in and possible answers to it. And one of them certainly is the kind of experience that you had with the Boulder Outdoor Survival School, and now are able to bring to hundreds of others per annum. So to all of our listeners, we'll see you again next week for another important edition of Listening to America.